Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Dan Baptiste, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. Welcome to Content Disrupted. Today, we're excited to welcome Raj Venkatesan. Raj is the Roland Trzcinski Professor of Business Administration at UVA's Darden School of Business. Raj teaches and researches at the intersection of marketing and technology with a primary focus on how AI and data-driven strategies can create customer-centric marketing experiences that drive results. Raj also happens to be the co-author of the AI Marketing Canvas, a go-to guide for businesses looking to strategically implement AI in their marketing efforts. He has consulted for global brands like Capital One and IBM, helping them leverage AI to drive innovation. Today, we'll explore Raj's insights on the future of AI in marketing and how brands can balance technology and human creativity to help build trust with customers. Raj, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here. It's my pleasure, Dan.
It's truly our pleasure, Raj. So thank you. Before we get too far, I'd love to take a step back and have you share your background and explain really how and why you got into researching AI's impact on marketing and really kind of building that into a curriculum.
Sure. So the story starts from my undergrad days because my undergrad is in computer engineering and I was tech nerd at that time. And this was also the time of what we call the AI winter when I was learning about deep learning and genetic algorithms and all the AI stuff that is becoming big now. And by different circumstances, I ended up in the business school taking courses in economics and marketing, and I liked it. And also, some of my mentors mentioned that this tech stuff is really important in marketing. Do you want to continue doing this? Because I really liked the courses, wanted to stay there, and also felt like I found a purpose for the technology, right? Like that, what I'm learning about coding and other technical details, I found a great application area that I also liked. Because I liked humans, I like understanding about human motivations and how people buy and how do you position your brands. All that was fascinating for me. And if I can marry the two interests, it would be great. So that's how I started getting into this field. All this to say that I've always been at the intersection of technology and marketing. When I got into the marketing field, I came in with a specific purpose of trying to understand how technology and marketing interfaces. And that's what I have done all throughout. So in the last few years, the worlds have collided. And now we see a lot of interest in technology and AI and how AI affects marketing. And that's how I found myself in this space and also why I wanted to do research and work on this field.
Awesome. And you have the complicated job of preparing the next workforce for this like AI fueled world that's largely undefined. So when you look at some of the principles that you deliver to your students, like can you describe some of the foundational pieces that folks really need to understand, whether you're a student or a marketer, on how to operate and function in this world where tech and human and marketing and customer experience are also intertwined?
Yeah. So I teach this course on digital marketing. And the first day, I share with them how technology and marketing has always interfaced. There's this quote by John Lasseter from Pixar where he talks about how art imitates technology and technology imitates art. I tell the students, well, you can take art from that quote and replace it with marketing, and it will still be true. And I show this evolution of marketing from the first time the television ads ran. TV was the technology of that time. And marketers were there at the outset using that technology at that time, right? The high tech television creating ads. And when cable TV came, they started segmenting and started creating different segmented ads. And then in the 80s, you had database systems, you had direct mail. This was the world where you started making thousands of segments and started personalizing. And then you had the internet revolution, Web 2.0, and now you have AI. Through all of this, marketers have always embraced technology. And one of the main skills marketers need is the ability to understand where your customers are, reach where your customers are, and also use data as much as you can that is available at that time to better understand customers, to better develop products that deliver value to customers, and to connect with customers better. So, the fundamental thing I talk to my students about, which I want them to get from this, is you need to understand the fundamentals of marketing. That doesn't change. Value creation and value appropriation and the balance of that is always going to be there. With technology, what you're trying to do is address more granular segments. You're going from mass marketing to segments of maybe one nowadays. But that's what is changing, but your principles stay the same.
Yeah, I think that's comforting for marketers. It feels like there's such a swirl, right? So you're asked to understand so many things. As a senior marketer that's running teams, sometimes teams of upwards of 1,000 people, starting to even contemplate the segments and subsegments and the business units and the marketing to a singular person and using technology and understanding those dynamics, it's gotten so complicated. But I think retreating back, what are the principles? Like, are we chasing tactics and tools, or are we staying true to who we are and using technology to really expand the value the brand can bring to people? And to your point, creating relevance now from mass market to segments down even to individuals now, which is really interesting. And as we look at the pace of innovation, does that change how you think about curriculum and how you talk to students and things like that? Because even for us, when I look at this world 6 months ago is radically different, not radically different to your point. The principles are the same, but how you go about it is different. What's possible is different. When you think about educating folks, is it still focus on the basics and apply it with a modern toolkit, or does your curriculum change at the speed of innovation? And if so, how do you keep up with that?
So that's a great question. And in my electives and with my courses, I also teach a course on AI in marketing, which reflects my book a lot more. Yes, to answer your last question first, you do have to keep up. I do. And that's what is enriching for me is this almost forces me to stay up to date. Mm-hmm. And it prevents me from slacking. So I like that part. It's like this fail safe that I've created for me, right? That I need to be up to date. So I'm always reading, always getting newsletters, listening to podcasts. And I try to also listen to Beyond Marketing because I also have my technology hat on. I also try to listen to technology podcasts and try to see, okay, how does that have implications for marketing? So I try to be a little ahead going into the tech space and understanding what are the latest things that are coming up now that might hit the marketing field a few years later. So that's definitely a key part of being in this field, especially in marketing. That's also really something that is exciting for me. Is it's all new stuff I love hearing about and learning. So that's rewarding. So and now going to the class. So I cannot change the whole course up every term, right? Yeah. There's some things that are going to be there, but then I try to bring in new things all the time. So there is an exercise that we do, and this is relevant for content marketing actually, where we look at consumer insights using online data sources. So they have to go to Google Trends and they have to go to Answer the Public, which is now owned by, I think, Uber Suggest. And then they also have, I give them access to a social listening platform to understand, like they can choose a brand, but they have to understand what the consumers want, where the consumers are, because online is a big focus group. Right? There's so much information that you can gather. And traditionally, I was doing that to only identify keywords, and the keywords identification process was manual. But now, what I have done is ask them to also look at GenAI, like either go to Google Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot, and use the consumer insights exercise to create the prompt that will allow the GenAI to give you keywords, generate keywords, and compare the different tools. So I'm introducing GenAI into the process that they've already gone through. So I do that type of innovation. Where are the places where I can include some Gen AI into the curriculum, and where it is appropriate, I do that. I have developed cases on AI, return on investment, comparing language translation capability in an app versus a video commerce capability. What I also do in the class is I give the students 2 sessions where they can choose the topic they want to discuss. And I give them a few topics and then give them another option where they can choose what they want. So they have 2 choices where they can explore. And what I do there is once they choose the topics, I give with some sufficient lead time, I bring them current materials, news articles, and other articles that they can read to have a discussion on the current topics that they want to discuss. So I have to keep it a little more flexible to allow some customization for them. And that allows me also to be current because I understand from the students what they're hearing, what they're interested in. And so it's a combination of all of this.
Yeah, I love that. One, certainly, I think everybody feels the pressure that you're feeling now of like staying current, and there's so many information sources. I'd be curious on the last point. What are some of the things your students have brought to you that they want to discuss that maybe was interesting or unexpected or got you to a place that you didn't think you would go?
So I think the expected part was they wanted to talk more about Gen AI and they wanted to see how to use Gen AI in the marketing process. The other thing that was interesting to me was they were still very interested in social media and influencer marketing. Even though I had like one class on influencer marketing, they wanted to hear more. They wanted more time to discuss that. So that was really interesting for me to see that in their mind, as consumers, they're consuming all of this and they want to know, flip that and see as a brand manager, how are they going to leverage it and what are some success stories? What can we learn from success and failures? So that was surprising for me. I expected a lot more like VR or augmented reality and more but they wanted to know more about social media and influencer and talk more about that. So that has legs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you and I are probably in the same boat where we're constantly trying to stay ahead of trends and what's current up to the minute or second, which is a lot of pressure. And then you go back into the market and people are having sometimes different conversations, right? So you have to make sure you're not too far ahead of the market, but you understand where things are going, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, there's a lot of craze about AI now, and people are talking a lot about that, and it's justified. But at the same time, we have to understand that it rests on the foundation of data. And the generic AI tools are great, they have caught our interest. But the next phase will all depend on the quality of information that brands have. And that has always been a challenge in terms of collecting data and fine tuning the training data sets and such. So I find that is going to take some time. So we're going through the hype cycle. Last whole year was great, justifiably a lot of interest in this, and it has a lot of potential. We will now start to see a little more crystallizing of the potential and some proper scalable use cases coming out and brands really trying to figure out how it works for them.
Yeah, I want to poke at that because I think that's important for people to understand. So you mentioned at the start, there was a couple of big tech revolutions where marketing absorbed some new sort of tech oriented massive change. And then there's a hype cycle, slows down, and then all of a sudden becomes just part of what you do, right? Is this similar? It feels bigger and more complicated because generative AI has allowed tools and things to come in at such a rapid rate. And the narrative of cost savings and scalability and all of that stuff is super attractive in a volatile economy. So everybody's spinning, right? But do you see in the next what time frame where the hype cycle calms down, we understand where these tools fit, what to do with them, and start to see real successful applications of technology? Like, what do you see that time frame being?
So I think the hype cycle is certainly, from what I understand from managers now, is that they understand to some extent what GPT is. They've tried it. They've tried it to answer emails, for example. They've tried it for their own little tasks, and they've seen some proof of concepts in terms of generating imagery or videos. But you're seeing some examples come out that are a lot more robust now. I think L'Oreal has some good examples of how they are using GenAI to create imagery about their brands, including 3D imagery, and how they've used training data to make that happen. But what you're also seeing is that they're using it for inspiration. They're using it for inspiring their creatives with like multiple different options that can then inspire the creators to create maybe the final product. But you're seeing some of that come out in terms of their with brands, what they're able to do. I think what goes with AI that is always been there, but because it's kind of in the background and not in front of us, is like the whole ad exchange has been completely AI driven, and more of the creative side is going to get AI driven on that front in terms of writing ads or even creating display ads and the products that Google has for all the advertisers on their platform. And others also, I believe, will have similar things, but I'm aware of what Google has. Those are some things where you will start seeing vendors providing more services to brands, where Google is already saying, hey, just upload your product images and we will manage and tell us the metrics you want to maximize. And we can manage the whole digital campaign, including the level of personalization. And if you give us the parameters of the message, we can figure out which message goes to whom and target. And that level of personalization is already happening. So I think we are on the way with some use cases that are particularly interesting. But whether it goes mainstream as much as how email marketing is now, it'll take some time. I think at least 5 6 years, accounting for the speed at which these things are changing. I think it's a minimum of 5 6 years where it becomes as prevalent as email marketing.
Yeah, it's interesting on our side. I mean, we're in the content space, and when you look at how a brand connects with people and even things like thought leadership, inherently, you have to have something important to say that's unique to you and valuable to your customer, which is the antithesis of like, AI, go create this from the internet. But it can help with things that you mentioned, right? Like, can I summarize the conversation and the topic demand? When I have content, could I do more with it? Like, can I take this piece and turn it into an integrated campaign with copy and imagery and those things? So I think where the misstep that we've seen is almost a misuse AI in the sort of marketing ecosystem to say, oh yeah, it can just do all of that creation for us and we don't have to play a role. So it's interesting, even on the inspiration side, you still need the work product,
Yeah.
but AI can wrap around it, right? But when you get to whole cloth creation, you start to get a little disillusioned. Would
Yes.
you agree with that?
Yes. And the key for brands to understand is that they need the data to train the AI. The main competition, I believe, that is going to come is how brands can use GenAI better and how they can train it on proprietary first party data. That is going to be the key. Because if you think about strategically how the market is evolving, you have these big LLM models. There are maybe three or four of them, GPT being the biggest, Gemini, Llama, Stable. There are a few of them, but they're all doing similar things. Okay, there is marginal differences. So you can think of the algorithm as commodity. Now it's an expensive commodity, but they're all the same. Okay. Now, what is a differentiator for a brand? Data and the insights that it has about its customers. The interactions that the brand has with their customers is specific to knowledge that the brand has. And that information needs to be translated into data that can be then trained to create a Gen AI model that is specific for a brand. Then it starts paying dividends. So a brand needs to learn the skills of assembling that data and running some experiments, which is also the steps we recommend in our book. Is the first thing is the foundation layer of training data sets. There is brand specific and customer specific.
I want to dig in there. As we look at the book, AI Canvas, I remember seeing on LinkedIn a picture of the book. So I was excited to talk to you and this was like really early on. I'm like, oh my God, there's already books about this. And the space was exploding. And you were there, if I got the date right, you were there before GPT and OpenAI went mainstream. So kudos to you. Saw where things were headed before it got there. But talk to me about writing this book in this environment and almost predicting the environment. I think you were maybe a year before everything really took off. You were already in market with the book. So can you talk about the philosophy, what motivated you to write the book, what that experience was like before any of this was even in market and your future telling at that point?
Thank you for saying that. I would say that I don't think I predicted GPT. I did not predict GPT when it first would come, right? But what I had seen in the industry was more use of data and like use of deep learning. I think AlphaGo had come at that time. So like Alpha Mind from DeepMind was there where it beat Go champion. And so there was a big news around that. So we knew this deep learning was becoming big. We saw Google Images doing some really interesting stuff. And so there was a lot of talk about machine learning and deep learning changing marketing. That's where we came in and said, okay, this is becoming more and more mainstream. I saw brands starting to use it, marketers starting to talk about data and post digital transformation, post Web 2.0. We're talking about how they can leverage data and also like in natural language processing, video, all of that was so multimedia data, how we can use this, right? So that was going on, and we saw that happening. So we started talking to brands that were down this road of using data and using AI at that time, pre-Gen AI, what was going on. And there was some talk about Gen AI, but it was nothing that we thought would be GPT that would be scalable. And what we heard where there were some instances, we mentioned this in the book, is an example of Chase, where they used a company called Presado, where they were building AI that would write ads for Chase, digital ads. Like that was really amazing when we heard that. They had developed these models that would understand how words influence people, and based on some understanding of customers' preferences, they can generate a tagline that would be the most influential for that customer. So as we went down talking to brands and we started hearing about these, we were more and more sure that this is going to happen, that we are down this path, that technology is going to move forward, that there is a shift in how people are viewing data and how their confidence is increasing in using it to automate marketing. So that was definitely part of our experience when we were going and talking to brands. At the same time, we also saw some brands that were saying they're going to wait it out, they're not ready to jump in yet. So there, it was a mixed bag. It was not like everybody was cheerleading this development, but there were some naysayers as well, which I think is true even now. There are still people who are naysayers. But my co-author who worked in Google talked about how his boss at the time, like Eric Schmidt, the previous CEO at Google, mentioned that when internet was going on and search was becoming big, and at that time he asked the Google employees a simple question: do you think there'll be more search tomorrow or less search tomorrow than today? That was it. So that's how the same question we asked ourselves: is there going to be more sophisticated technology tomorrow or less?
Sure. That's a great perspective. Yeah, it's funny. We were in a similar boat at that time. We helped create high quality content for brands at scale, and we were doing it all manually. So we were working with folks and just creating things one at a time, and we're like, it is killing us, right? Because now you need more and more content. So we started looking at NLPs at that time and said, wow, what if we could possibly get marketers okay with using NLPs or generative AI in the content creation process? So we built what we call our atomization engine, where we took a piece of content and said, hey, could you create all of these different experiences off of this content we fed to you? And we put it in, hit a button. We trained it on different personas, get a cup of coffee, come back 10 minutes later, and you're like, oh, wow, like there's all this other stuff here. And it was really cool. And we're like, but how can we get people even comfortable with the idea of using AI in content creation, which is really funny. We launched that product about 3 weeks before ChatGPT came to market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that did help, right? Like
Yeah.
now GPT is like validating all your efforts, and people are
Sure.
suddenly believing that and are willing to take a chance with products
Yes.
like yours.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned a 5 stage framework.
Yes.
I'd love for you to kind of walk through that. And I'm also curious if that's changed. I mean, that book was written before all of this technology in rapid succession has come to market. So, does that framework still hold? And if so, can you kind of walk us through it?
Yeah, so I think it still holds in the sense that our North Star in the framework is primarily around personalizing all aspects of customer engagement, which would include customer engagement is customer acquisition, retention, growth, and customer advocacy or customer word of mouth. Right? And I think personalization of all aspects of customer engagement is certainly a North Star even now after Gen AI. And our steps were first the foundation layer, so collect the training data. Second was experimenting, where you will try to personalize one task of an engagement, either customer acquisition campaign or promotion campaign for customer retention. You'll try many different experiments to see what is working for you based on your context. Then it will be expanding and building on that experimentation stage to try to personalize more than one aspect of your customer engagement. So that's like the crawl, walk, run model, right? Like you start experimenting, build on that experiments to expand your investments, start building a AI marketing group with a champion who's now going to coordinate the efforts within marketing and across divisions. And the fourth stage was transformation, where this would be personalizing all aspects of your customer engagement, really investing in AI, building either an in-house AI capability or acquiring an AI company or a technology. And the fifth stage is monetization, where what we saw that was fascinating at the time was companies who were early on in this stage had developed capabilities that they were now providing AI as a service and creating new business models based on that. So, in fact, I have been presenting this model. Even now, I'm presenting the same model to different brands around the world, and it still resonates even when they're looking at Gen AI. I update the examples to bring in more Gen AI at each stage, but the steps and the goals of the transformation is still relevant.
As you're looking at this, obviously organizations have to be brought through this transformation and then now operate in this new world. You mentioned either building or partnering or acquiring technology. Given the speed and sophistication of this, do you think brands are equipped to just go out and do this on their own? Is that even smart, given how much goes into actually transforming if you're doing it for the first time with a cluster of folks? Or do you think at this point in the market, outside help is really critical to make sure you don't make a misstep?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, in the experimentation stage and expansion stage, we really recommend working with vendors who are giving you current services to then add and talk to them about providing some AI services as well. So, you
Mhm.
need to include your current vendors into the conversation and work with them. And now it's mainly the Gen AI vendors or vendors who are using Gen AI to develop their services, right? Because that way its advantage is, yes, your investments are lower, you can move faster because the vendors already have the technology and the know-how, and you can learn from them and see what is working and what is not. And as you start getting some use cases, some wins in your column, then you can think about, okay, how do we customize this into our own space? But
Mhm.
you certainly need to work with vendors to bring that and know-how that they have into your environment.
Sure. And you talked about personalization. As marketers, we've been talking about personalization exhaustively for, I don't know, 10, 15 years,
Yeah.
and rarely has it come to fruition at the scale or the promise. Like there's so many tools and
Yes.
opportunities for it. It feels like it's finally possible now when we're thinking about versioning content for
Yeah.
groups and individuals. But can you define, especially as we're thinking about marketing, like how you think about personalization? Because I think obviously as a marketer, you don't want so many different messages in market that you can't wrap your arms around them. Obviously, personalization has to operate within the confines of the brand. So, can you talk about like the restrictions that you would put or the opportunity with personalization while still leveling up to some of the key components of the brand and how they want to show up in them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that is a lot of times when we write books or in academics, we give some theoretical ideas about personalization, and it is also about like a North Star of like this is the goal, but it needs to be balanced with the practical realities of how much is possible and also how much personalization the customer wants. So even if you look at like Netflix or Amazon, they're still personalizing at the segment level. They have a lot of segments, but they're still doing segment level. And like on Netflix, you still see they have this top 10 movies or top 10 TV series. We want to know that as humans. We want to know what others are watching. We want to be not in our own island doing our own things. We want to see what others are doing, and there's a social component to it. So it's a balance between belonging to a group versus I want exactly what I need. So consumers also have that balance that they want. And so brands have to understand that. They have to give consumers personalized content or products that they would like. But at the same time, sometimes consumers are variety seeking. Consumers want to know what others are using. So being part of a segment is useful. Allowing some kind of error in the model is not bad because it allows some exploration, it allows some expansion of the customer relationship as well.
I love that perspective. It's really interesting on even just discovery and how we discover things. Like if everything is fed to us based on our behavior, where it's almost this self-fulfilling prophecy where we never break out of that path, which as human beings we want to, right? Because as soon as somebody introduces a new idea to us, we're off to that idea. How could you possibly influence my thought or behavior, which is a really interesting perspective. And to that point, do you think there's philosophies that have to change when it comes to how we think about personalization and the components of it? Or do you think brands are already behaving and thinking in the way that you just described?
I think they're behaving also in the way that I described for different reasons. One is there are constraints in terms of how much you can do in terms of your model and how accurate your model is, because sometimes you don't have enough data about a customer. And to grow a customer relationship, you will have to then look at who else looks like your customer and borrow information from that to personalize your customer relationship, right? So on a very technical level, you may not have data about that customer to make reliable predictions. So you would have to put them into a segment. In technology, they call it the cold start problem, is when they begin, people don't have information. The other is also the ROI of personalization. How much is the return you gain for personalization from that customer? So there is that question. And related to that ROI question is these GenAI models are expensive to run. And so the ROI quickly becomes negative if the customer doesn't return from the customer is not big enough for the investment of running a model at the level of individual customers. So in B2B we've seen this story before. We have key account teams, then we have regional teams, and then we have other customers that go through a distributor. I think it's going to be something like that in B2C as well.
It's interesting. And if I play that back to how we started the conversation where you said it's probably 5 or 6 years before you really get to something interesting, understanding the reliance on scaled, accessible, organized data and systems to interpret that and people to know what to do with that. Is that your thesis on the time frame? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, and also the data that companies need to collect now, first party data, that is then available to train the models to make. And also, it's not just the data collection. Now, once the main idea with Gen AI and all these AI models is reinforcement learning. That is in Chat GPT, when you're saying liking a response or not, that is really important because that's how the model learns based on its output, whether it is predicting right or wrong, and it learns from that. So brands need that time where their model is generating outputs and they are giving feedback to the model saying, hey, you did a good job, or hey, this was not what I was looking for. So that period, so it's the data collection, assembling the data, and also ensuring it's not biased and it's speaking with the brand's voice. But it's also not just the brand's data. You need like the market data in terms of some kind of non-brand data to help the model train. After the training is done, then there is the reinforcement learning part where you are trying to give feedback to the model based on its output, saying whether it's good or not, before you then launch it. So that's why it would take some time. Like every brand is become creating their own GPT now, but they're beginning that process at this.
Yeah. So would you say for that reason, we haven't even come close to realizing the potential of what this could or should
Oh,
deliver back?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think 10 years from now, 15 years from now, marketing will definitely be disrupted. It will be changed. Today, based on what I'm seeing, my belief is it is a lot of changes coming. How it will look like, how the worlds will look like, is nobody can predict that accurately.
In absence of a brand having a sophisticated data and AI practice, do you think partnering with vendors that maybe don't have so much training data yet, but can give you a head start on leveraging and using some of this technology to then reinforce your philosophy and how to collect data and use it and what you need to build and why is that kind of how you're thinking about the world?
Yes, and also what vendors can help is the market data because they have worked with different, there is a breadth of information that they can bring in that will help train your own models too. So the brands gain that breadth of information if they work with vendors, and also some amount of understanding of how to prompt engineer and also train the internal folks in using the GPT. Because there's a lot of investment that brands are now making to train their people in creating the right kind of prompts. How do you work with the GPT, including legal in the picture to see what is allowed or not.
And do you see that as a centralized or a decentralized function? Meaning, when we get down to the idea of prompt creation, that's going to deliver specific outputs. That's not something that you want to unleash on the entire organization, if I understand that right, where there's unpredictable results versus having maybe a library of prompts that deliver predictable outputs within data? Or do you see it differently, where everybody should be able to just create prompts and get outputs of the data?
We need frameworks that we can use from the past and adapt to the current. I think what we have done with analytics is something similar. The way we've had centralized, but also it's a hub and spoke model where like there's central team, but the central team also sends people who are specialized in marketing or campaign creation or content creation. And you need to have review boards that look at the outcomes and to see approve whether this is consistent with the brand image and the brand sentiment and language and personality. At the same time, the challenge brands have is while they are creating these layers, they also need to be flexible and fast and dynamic, and that is going to be the real challenge for brands now.
So how do they do that in a world where you need stuff yesterday? There's pressure on results. Boards and executive teams are saying, "Oh, like hurry up and deploy AI to get those gains." When in reality, to do it right is going to take 5 to 6 years, and to really realize it, to your point, may take as many as 8 to 10 years. So how leaders navigate those kind of choppy waters?
I think one thing you can look at is also where you use AI, because what we've discussed in terms of outputs is primarily customer facing decisions. But there's a lot to be gained in the internal process automation. So one example I heard is salespeople, for example, spend a lot of time, more than 70% of their time, entering data into Salesforce or some sales ERP like that, and creating forms and reports and such. What if you automate that using GenAI and allow the salesperson more time to engage with customers? And for one salesperson, then they can reach many more customers for the same time they work in. You've just made the sales team more productive. So, or another example could be take a white paper and create a podcast from the white paper automatically, right? So, all of these are activities that you can definitely engage in with maybe less layers of checks and balances, and wait till when you build the products that face the customers. That may take some time and you need to take some precautions and be careful. But you can use a generic GPT with proper data protection so that your data doesn't leave your company and stays within your company. With that kind of agreements, generic GPT or Gen AI, you can automate a lot of processes. But that doesn't mean you're going to reduce the headcount. You just made your current headcount do more activities that are value adding than doing paperwork that was necessary but was not really value adding immediately. That can be automated using Gen AI.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that people have to understand, which is you see a generic GPT or large language model, and you're like, awesome, I can do the same job with 40% less people. That's not the case until you get to the place that you're describing, this utopia where everything is, you have a data infrastructure and you have services on top of it, and you can kind of run down that path. But in the meantime, thinking of the less sexy things and the less market facing things, like can we automate mundane tasks or repeatable tasks that happen consistently in this way? Can we think about data collection or market extraction of, like, oh, if I go out to market data, can I understand sentiment on this topic really quickly that would have taken me a week or more to collect and understand? I think that's important because specifically from a leadership standpoint, I think that's a gap in understanding. And really for a lot of people is like, what can this do and what can it not do? And then you start having this, hey, is this another chain thing where we were promised a bunch of stuff and it never came to reality? And hearing what you're saying is there's going to be massive transformation, but the infrastructure at the brand and company level has to catch up in order for that to take place, which will take time that isn't 2 weeks or 4 weeks.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the marketing process will change, right? We'll get more agile. We'll go into more scrums. We will probably reduce our agile sprints from 2 weeks to 1 week or half a week. That's the productivity gain that we will get. So, but marketing is going down the path of being more dynamic, and that is going to still happen.
Yeah, which is exciting because I think most of us in marketing have felt overwhelmed, right? Like you look at all the channels and the audiences and the tasks and everything that we need to do. And to your question earlier, do I think it's going to get more simple later? Probably
Yeah.
not, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And then there is the protection of like the data, there is cybersecurity
sure.
concerns. We haven't even touched the concerns part of it, right? Like there
Yeah.
is a bias in the data, then there is misinformation, you have virtual influencers that you need to worry about. There's a ton of other stuff which is on the watch out area, which is still important for brands.
Yeah, I
Because
mean, you hit a few of them. So I'd love to hear what the biggest ones are beyond the list you just shared. And also, what are the biggest opportunities for failure here? Like, what are the missteps that people need to be cautious of? And also, what are the risks inherent in exploring this path?
So, the one thing I think we alluded to earlier, there is democratization of capability, but how do we ensure whatever gets out of the company stays to the brand's voice and doesn't create controversy for the brand? And so that is from the brand side itself, unintentional, right? There is like, it's not like in malice that is intended, but some things that you send out that without you realizing creates an issue with your consumers. I think that is something which you definitely need to watch out for. And that's why we talked about the caution in terms of care, in terms of checks and balances. On the other side, what you also want to watch out for is activists and people who are upset. Now, they have a powerful tool, way more powerful than social media, to then be activist. And they can create misinformation if they want to, but even if they don't create misinformation, they can organize much faster, they can spread information much faster, create information much faster. So your reaction speed has to be really important in terms of when you have a PR crisis in your hands, for example. The other would be data. You're using a lot of data about customers. How do you ensure you properly follow privacy regulations? How do you ensure you properly follow ethical regulations, ethical frameworks in terms of using the data and ensuring that who has access to that data, what data that you use, they're properly anonymized. And those are some risks also that you need to be worried about.
To your point on ethics and ethical use of data and information, there's still questions when you see people doing things like generating imagery from AI. Well, like, is it ethical since it's trained on other people's copywritten material? Or, so starting to think about that. I know the legislation is going to have a hard time catching up or enforcing on a global platform, but as brands starting to think in terms of, okay, is this my IP and my original ideas and thinking, or am I just drafting off of other people's work, whether it's written, design, visual, right? So these are large debates that haven't been settled for the most part. So in addition to the caution and security risks, the ethical questions are still present. And I think a lot of people are just kind of running past. And when those conversations catch up, there could be a reckoning there. I don't know if you agree with that.
Absolutely. And also, even now, for global brands, this frame is different across the globe. Mm-hmm. In terms of, okay, using image recognition or facial recognition. There are different perspectives on when it is allowed and when it is not allowed across the globe, or even how can AI be used. For example, let alone AI. In Europe, B2B organizations are treated the same way as B2C in privacy regulations. It is not the case in US. So if you're a global brand, there are these minutia and nuances about regulations that you need to understand between like even US and Europe. Now you have Asia with different rules or South America. So for global brands, it really gets very challenging to navigate even at the current space, the differences across the regulatory environments. And add on that, it's changing. And even in the US, every state, at least for privacy regulations, is different. Some states have it, some states don't have it yet. EU has one law, and EU has a AI rules now, which US is trying to create an AI Bill of Rights. So there is that thing, the landscape, which is changing now. So you need to be, as a brand manager leader, you need to be cautious about those things. And I see brands like being cautious really about this, especially around copyrights, especially around what data they can use to train the model, right? So that is the main discussion that is happening right now.
Sure. Well, Raj, I could talk to you all day. Unfortunately, we're running to the end here. I guess my last question is, if you were to write a book today, looking forward, what would you focus on, given all the dynamics based on your research and the discussions and where you see the market headed?
Yeah, so some of the things I have been thinking about this, and I have two kind of ideas. One is I would think about these day-to-day challenges around privacy, around ethics, and around how it changes the marketing process, right? And so I think I would definitely think about those. Because in the first book, we looked at capabilities, but we never looked at the process in which marketing happens and how technology is changing that process. So that is one thing. Down the road, what am I excited about with technologies, I guess, and what I'm looking for is I'm really fascinated by the combination of GenAI and physical systems and robots coming into the picture, which I don't think is a pipe dream. I think there are indications now that there is technology that is showing that they have dexterity, they have vision, they're getting to a place where it can become a real thing. And then how does marketing evolve when you have this robot?
How do we
And
evolve?
how do we evolve,
I
right?
saw some of the robots.
Yeah,
I think Elon has personal
yeah,
robots that you can buy,
yeah,
and they can mow the lawn and make you dinner.
yeah. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that is what I'm like really fascinated by is merging of the digital and the physical. I think
Mm.
there's going to be like autonomous car is one example of that, but you're going to see a lot of that happening in the space. And I'm really watching out there to see, like I'm reading and learning a lot about, okay, what is going on here and trying to keep myself up to date on that.
Yeah, it's interesting, a little scary, but certainly interesting in how the world is coming together. Well, Raj, really, really appreciate your insights here. I think as we think about this complicated technology and marketing environment, taking a step back and saying, okay, there are key principles that are still true, right? The things
Mhm.
I'm good at, I still need to be good at. It's just how I deploy them are starting to change. So
Yeah,
understanding that under job number one is still creating value between the brand and the customer and understanding,
absolutely.
that value equation and thinking about how technology can continue to play a role there versus chasing maybe cost cutting tactics that probably, to your point, won't even cut headcount and certainly could corrupt the experience if done wrong. So thank you for all that insight. We appreciate you. You provided a ton of value, and sounds like I may have to have you back to talk about the robots because I'm very
The
curious.
robot revolution, right? We talk about
Or
that.
maybe I'll invite Robot Raj on
Yeah,
for part two.
robot. There you go.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. It was
Awesome.
a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sounds good. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. To stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing, visit our website at skyward.com. That's skyword.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling.